They whispered her name only at night, when doors were shut and lamps burned low. She moved through palaces and tents alike, trading glances for secrets and kisses for maps. Empires bled because of what she heard behind silk curtains. In a world ruled by swords and crowns, she carried a quieter weapon, desire sharpened into espionage. Long before modern intelligence services, the Middle East had its own Mataharis, women whose beauty hid deadly purpose. Their stories were erased, rewritten, or buried beneath scandal, but the consequences of their betrayals reshaped dynasties and toppled kings. The ancient Middle East was a land of rival courts, shifting alliances, and endless wars fought as much with information as with steel. Long before the word espionage existed, rulers understood that knowledge was power, and the most effective spies were often those least suspected. Within royal harems, merchant caravans, and sacred temples, women occupied spaces closed to generals and ministers. From these hidden vantage points, they observed conversations, memorized routes, and learned the weaknesses of men who believed themselves untouchable. These women were not merely ornaments of luxury or victims of circumstance. Many were trained from youth to read subtle changes in tone, to recognize fear masked as confidence, and to manipulate desire without appearing to do so. In courts from Assyria to Persia, from Babylon to the Levant, seduction became a political tool. A shared bed could unlock military plans. A whispered promise could delay an invasion. A lover's quarrel might ignite a war. One of the earliest recorded examples appears in Mesopotamian chronicles describing priestesses who served both gods and kings. Officially devoted to ritual purity, they were often positioned close to power. Kings confided in them before campaigns, believing divine favor spoke through their lips. In reality, some priestesses maintained secret loyalties to rival cities, passing sacred knowledge along trade routes disguised as religious offerings. Their betrayals were rarely punished publicly. Exposure would have shattered faith itself. As empires expanded, so did the sophistication of these networks. The Persian court, sprawling and multilingual, depended on constant flows of intelligence. Royal women, especially those married into the dynasty from conquered regions, became living bridges between cultures. Some used this position to protect their homelands, feeding misinformation to Persian officials while sending accurate reports east and west. Others embraced ambition, trading secrets for influence, titles, or survival. Greek historians later described these women with fascination and unease. To them, the idea that wars could be shaped by perfume and smiles was deeply unsettling. Yet even their biased accounts reveal a truth. Male rulers consistently underestimated female intelligence. This blind spot allowed spies to operate in plain sight. A woman's presence was expected, ignored, and dismissed, which made her invisible and therefore powerful. Seduction was only one method. Many spies relied on hospitality, becoming trusted companions to queens and generals alike. They managed households, oversaw banquets, and controlled access to private chambers. Every invitation carried opportunity. Every overheard argument was a potential weapon. Information moved slowly, hidden within embroidery patterns, coded jewelry, or the timing of ritual processions. Punishment, when discovered, was absolute. A woman accused of espionage faced torture, public humiliation, or silent execution. To admit she had succeeded would expose the fragility of male authority. For this reason, many names were erased from official records, surviving only in rumors and fragmented texts. Their legacy is not found in statues, but in sudden defeats, inexplicable retreats, and treaties signed under mysterious circumstances. Among nomadic tribes, the role of female informants was even more pronounced. Women traveled freely between camps as brides, healers, or mourners, carrying news across vast distances faster than any messenger on horseback. Songs and oral poetry became vehicles for coded intelligence, with verses altered subtly to signal danger or opportunity. Outsiders heard music, leaders heard strategy. Legends from the Arabian Peninsula tell of women who delayed sieges by seducing enemy commanders, only to poison their supplies or mislead their scouts. These tales, often dismissed as folklore, align with archaeological evidence of sudden strategic failures that cannot be explained by force alone. Desire clouded judgment, and arrogance completed the trap. The danger was constant. A single misstep could mean exposure. Trust was a currency spent carefully, and loyalty shifted with survival. Some spies served multiple masters, while others changed allegiance after witnessing brutality or betrayal. Their morality was shaped by necessity, not ideology. In a violent world, information was the only shield they possessed. What unites these stories is silence. Unlike male generals whose defeats were recorded, the victories of these women were absorbed quietly into history. They altered borders without ever standing on a battlefield. Their influence lingered in the shadows, shaping the ancient Middle East in ways still debated by historians today. Understanding their role forces a reevaluation of ancient power. Empires did not rise and fall by armies alone. They were guided, misled, and sometimes destroyed by those who listened more than they spoke. The Mata Haris of antiquity were not myths, but architects of hidden history, operating where no chronicler dared to look. Their stories invite discomfort because they reveal how fragile dominance truly was. Behind every proclamation of strength stood corridors filled with secrets. In those corridors, women moved quietly, changing the fate of cities while remaining unseen, unheard, and officially non-existent. This hidden tradition set the stage for everything that followed, ensuring that future empires would inherit not only lands and armies, but the invisible art of seduction turned into statecraft. It was an art perfected in whispers, glances, and moments history refused to record. Its consequences, however, were carved into the map of the ancient world. As kingdoms rose and collapsed, the methods of these ancient spies grew darker and more refined. By the time of the Neo-Assyrian and later Achaemenid empires, intelligence was no longer improvised, it was institutionalized. Royal courts quietly acknowledged that information gathered through intimacy was often more reliable than reports delivered by soldiers. Women were therefore placed deliberately near centers of power, not always as lovers, but as attendants, musicians, translators, and healers. Each role provided legitimate access, and each access point carried risk. Assyrian records speak cryptically of palace women interrogated after sudden military failures. Their confessions were rarely preserved, but the punishments were recorded in chilling detail. Some were blinded, others flayed or sealed alive within walls. These acts were not only retribution, but warnings. Yet the practice never ended. The value of secrets outweighed the fear of discovery. Even terror could not extinguish ambition or survival instinct. In Babylon, elite courtesans known for their education in languages and astronomy frequented banquets attended by foreign envoys. Wine loosened tongues, but companionship dissolved caution entirely. A single evening could reveal troop numbers, supply shortages, or internal dissent. These details traveled far, sometimes crossing deserts hidden within caravan manifests or encoded in trade tallies. Merchants became unwilling accomplices, spreading intelligence without ever realizing it. Persian royal women wielded exceptional influence. Queens and concubines controlled vast estates, commanded servants, and corresponded across the empire. Their letters, outwardly concerned with marriages or religious offerings, often concealed political assessments. A delayed shipment,
A sudden change in ceremonial protocol or an unexpected invitation could signal strategic shifts. Greek observers struggled to comprehend this invisible governance, dismissing it as decadence while suffering its consequences. One of the most dangerous roles was that of the diplomatic bride. Women married into rival dynasties lived surrounded by enemies, expected to produce heirs while remaining loyal to their birth families. Some resisted, embracing their new identities. Others became conduits of intelligence, torn between blood and survival. Their choices influenced alliances, triggered assassinations, and occasionally prevented wars by revealing plots before they unfolded. Religion offered another cover. Temple women were assumed to exist outside politics, devoted solely to ritual. In reality, sanctuaries were hubs of information. Pilgrims arrived from distant regions, sharing news unknowingly. Priestess women memorized these fragments, assembling accurate pictures of regional instability. When temples aligned with particular rulers, this intelligence flowed discreetly to thrones. When they opposed them, silence itself became a weapon. Seduction, however, remained the most effective instrument. Ancient texts often frame these women as immoral or dangerous, a narrative that protected male reputations. Rarely did chroniclers admit that leaders were deceived not just by lust alone, but by confidence. These spies listened patiently, validating egos, allowing men to believe they were in control. The betrayal came later, far from the bedchamber, when armies marched into ambushes or cities found themselves defenseless. The psychological toll was immense. Living double lives required constant vigilance. Affection had to appear genuine. Fear could never surface. Many spies developed reputations for coldness or cruelty as emotional shields. Others disappeared voluntarily, vanishing into obscurity once their usefulness ended. Survival often meant abandoning identity entirely, becoming ghosts within history. Stories from the Levant describe women who shifted loyalties multiple times, adapting to changing power structures. They were pragmatic, not ideological. Empires did not inspire loyalty, people did. A trusted lover, a protected child, or a promised escape could redirect allegiance overnight. This fluid morality unsettled later historians, seeking clear heroes and villains. By the Hellenistic era, these traditions collided with Greek systems of documentation. Rumors of Eastern seductresses manipulating kings fed sensational accounts, blending fact and fantasy. Yet beneath exaggeration lay uncomfortable truths. Intelligence failures were blamed on women to preserve military honor. Executions were framed as moral cleansing rather than political silencing. What emerges is a pattern. Whenever centralized power grew, so did reliance on covert influence. Armies conquered land, but spies controlled outcomes. Women exploited assumptions about weakness, transforming invisibility into dominance. Their victories were quiet, their defeats erased, but their presence was constant. This hidden lineage passed forward through generations. Mothers trained daughters. Networks survived regime changes. The art of information through intimacy became inherited knowledge, whispered rather than written. By the time Rome looked eastward, it encountered not chaos, but centuries of perfected manipulation. The Middle East had already mastered the most dangerous battlefield of all, the human mind.
The Roman expansion into the eastern Mediterranean did not eliminate these traditions. It absorbed them. Roman officials arriving in Syria, Judea, and Egypt quickly realized that conquest did not grant control. The provinces were dense with memory, alliances, and quiet resentments. Information flowed beneath official channels, and much of it passed through women who understood how empires truly functioned. Roman arrogance blinded many governors, but those who survived longest learned to listen to whispers as carefully as they read decrees. In client kingdoms, local queens and noblewomen became intermediaries between Rome and native elites. Publicly, they performed loyalty. privately, they measured Roman weakness. A careless centurion's complaint, a senator's drunken boast, or a delayed tax shipment could reveal fractures within imperial authority. These fragments were relayed eastward, sometimes to Parthian courts, sometimes to rebel leaders hiding in deserts and mountains. Rome ruled by force, but it was resisted by knowledge. Egypt represented the most refined evolution of this hidden craft. Centuries of dynastic intrigue had trained royal women to treat secrecy as survival. Court life demanded constant performance. Facial expressions were monitored. Silence could be interpreted as treason. Women learned to communicate through ritual gestures, clothing choices, and controlled rumor. A sudden change in procession order or a canceled feast could signal political danger. These signals traveled faster than messengers. Seduction in this environment was not impulsive, it was deliberate strategy. Trust had to be earned slowly, often over years. Many women cultivated reputations for disinterest or aloofness to disarm suspicion. Others exaggerated frivolity, appearing harmless while memorizing everything around them. Roman sources often mistook these roles for personality traits, never realizing they were constructed identities designed for infiltration. Men recorded battles, women recorded people. They observed patterns of behavior, loyalties, fears, and weaknesses. They knew who drank too much, who feared disgrace, who longed for legacy. Power was rarely held by those who believed they possessed it. It belonged to those who understood dependency. Spies exploited loneliness as much as desire. An emperor surrounded by guards was often isolated. A woman who listened without judgment became indispensable. Failure was unforgiving. Discovery meant erasure. Executions were made public to reinforce control, but the reasons were disguised. Charges of immorality or witchcraft replaced accusations of espionage. This ensured two outcomes. The state avoided admitting vulnerability, and future spies learned the cost of exposure. Survival required mastery of fear. Many lived expecting death, treating each sunrise as borrowed time. Some spies did not survive long enough to be remembered, but others altered history decisively. Wars were delayed, assassinations were accelerated, treaties collapsed before ink dried. Entire cities were spared or condemned based on information delivered quietly at night. Yet these outcomes were attributed to generals and kings. The architects remained unnamed. Cultural memory reshaped these women into myths. Later storytellers portrayed them as temptresses or monsters, simplifying their roles to moral lessons. Complexity threatened comfort. Acknowledging strategic intelligence required admitting that power was not exclusively masculine. It was easier to condemn seduction than to confront manipulation. By the 1st century, Rome attempted to regulate this invisible battlefield. Laws restricting women's movement and correspondence multiplied. Surveillance increased, but control bred innovation. Codes replaced letters. Meaning was hidden in poetry, in trade ledgers, in religious offerings. Intelligence adapted faster than authority. It always had. These networks did not operate in isolation. They intersected with merchants, diplomats, and exiles. Information passed horizontally, not hierarchically. No single figure controlled the system. That decentralization made it resilient. Cutting one branch did not collapse the tree. This frightened emperors more than open rebellion. What united these spies was not ideology, but pragmatism. They served survival, not thrones. Allegiance shifted with circumstance. Loyalty was transactional. Moral judgment mattered less than outcome. To later historians seeking purity of motive, this ambiguity was unsettling. To the spies themselves, it was necessity. The Middle East did not produce a single Mata Hari, it produced generations of them. Their names changed, their methods evolved, but their purpose remained constant: to survive within empires that viewed them as expendable. History remembers conquests, it forgets negotiations whispered in the dark. Yet without those whispers, many empires would have fallen sooner. As centuries passed, the craft of espionage through intimacy adapted to new empires and new dangers. When Islam spread across the Middle East, bringing fresh political structures and moral frameworks, the practice did not disappear, it transformed. Courts in Damascus, Baghdad, and later Cairo became centers of extraordinary intellectual and political life. Power no longer relied solely on lineage or conquest, but on administration, theology, and scholarship. Information became more complex, and those who gathered it had to be more subtle than ever. Women in these courts were rarely visible to outsiders, which made them uniquely positioned to observe internal dynamics. Behind veils and walls, they witnessed succession disputes, theological rivalries, and the fragile balance between caliphs, viziers, generals, and religious authorities. Eunuchs, servants, and tutors formed silent ecosystems of communication. Women learned to navigate these systems with precision, understanding who could be trusted and who merely pretended loyalty. Poetry and music became tools of intelligence. A song performed at court could praise one faction while subtly warning another. A poem's metaphors carried layered meanings understood only by those trained to listen. Female poets and performers were especially valued, as their presence raised little suspicion. Their words traveled freely, memorized and repeated across cities, carrying encoded assessments of political stability or impending danger. Foreign powers continued to underestimate these networks. Crusaders entering the Levant relied on brute force and rigid hierarchies. They failed to grasp the fluidity of local intelligence systems. While armies clashed openly, women within cities listened, recorded, and redirected outcomes. Siege plans leaked, supply routes were compromised, negotiations were influenced before they began. To invading forces, these failures appeared mysterious, attributed to luck or betrayal. Rarely did they suspect the quiet observers behind walls. Punishment for discovery grew increasingly sophisticated. Instead of public executions, disappearances became common. Women accused of treachery vanished into prisons, convents, or exile. Official records listed illness or scandal. This ambiguity protected the state while reinforcing fear. Everyone understood the message without seeing the body. Silence became policy. Despite these risks, the tradition endured because it offered something rare: agency. In societies that restricted women's overt power, intelligence work provided influence otherwise unattainable. Decisions affecting thousands could hinge on a single conversation overheard or a carefully chosen word delivered at the right moment. This power was invisible but real, and once tasted, difficult to relinquish. Over time, historians attempted to separate myth from reality, often failing. Sources were fragmentary, biased, or deliberately misleading. Male chroniclers framed events to preserve honor or justify defeat. Women appeared only as stereotypes, seductresses, saints, or traitors. The truth existed between these extremes, complex and uncomfortable. What remains clear is that intelligence shaped the Middle East as profoundly as armies or faith. Empires rose not only through conquest, but through information asymmetry. Those who knew more acted first. Those who listened survived longer. Women who mastered this art became essential to power while remaining officially powerless. By the late medieval period, the groundwork for modern espionage was firmly established. Techniques refined over millennia passed quietly into new hands. Names changed, languages shifted, the methods endured. When later generations sought symbols to personify this tradition, they looked to figures like Mata Hari, but she was not an origin, she was an echo. The true origins lay far earlier, in courts and chambers where survival depended on observation, restraint, and the courage to act unseen. These women did not seek fame. History imposed silence upon them. Yet without their influence, the map of the Middle East, and perhaps the world, would look very different. The transition into the early modern era did not erase these ancient systems. It concealed them beneath diplomacy and ceremony. Ottoman power expanded across the Middle East, Intelligence became a formal necessity of governance. The empire stretched across continents, cultures, and religions, and its survival depended on constant awareness of internal fractures. Women within the imperial household, particularly in the harem, occupied a position both misunderstood and underestimated by outsiders. European observers reduced these spaces to fantasies of indulgence, failing to recognize them as centers of political calculation. Inside the palace, access mattered more than titles. Women closest to the ruler controlled schedules, filtered visitors, and shaped moods. A delayed audience or a whispered concern could alter policy. Information entered the court through countless channels: merchants, diplomats, prisoners, scholars, and servants. Women synthesized these fragments, identifying threats long before they reached the battlefield. Their influence rarely appeared in official records, yet it guided decisions affecting millions. The so-called Sultanate of Women was not an anomaly, but a continuation. Mothers, wives, and concubines acted as stabilizers during succession crises, manipulating alliances to preserve dynastic continuity. Intelligence gathered through personal networks allowed them to neutralize rivals without open violence. Exile replaced execution. Marriage replaced rebellion. Power was exercised quietly, preserving the illusion of masculine authority while shaping outcomes behind it. Beyond imperial centers, similar practices persisted at every level of society. Tribal leaders relied on women to assess loyalty within extended families. Urban elites depended on female relatives to navigate shifting political winds. In border regions, women married across cultures became bridges of information, transmitting knowledge that no army could obtain. Their loyalty was not guaranteed, but their insight was invaluable. European colonial expansion encountered these networks repeatedly and misunderstood them just as consistently. Western intelligence services struggled to penetrate societies where information moved through kinship rather than bureaucracy. Attempts to impose centralized surveillance failed against decentralized relational systems. Women who appeared powerless on paper proved invisible in practice. Their absence from official roles protected them from scrutiny. The moral language surrounding these spies hardened over time. Colonial narratives framed them as corrupt or manipulative, reinforcing stereotypes that justified intervention. By casting intelligence work as moral failure rather than strategic necessity, foreign powers dismissed its effectiveness. This dismissal proved costly. Revolts succeeded where intelligence was underestimated. Empires faltered where they failed to listen. Psychologically, the burden carried by these women remained immense. Constant performance eroded identity. Many lived without ever revealing their true thoughts, even to family. Trust was dangerous. Attachment was a liability. Some coped with faith, others through ritual, others through emotional withdrawal. Few found peace. Their reward was survival, not recognition. As modern nation-states emerged, these traditions fragmented but did not vanish. Intelligence agencies professionalized espionage, often excluding women formally, while relying on their informal access. The ancient craft adapted again, slipping between institutional gaps. Official histories celebrated innovation while ignoring continuity. By the 20th century, figures like Mata Hari captured public imagination precisely because they appeared exceptional. In reality, they were heirs to a lineage stretching back thousands of years. The difference was not method, but visibility. Modern media required a face. Ancient systems required silence. Understanding this lineage challenges simplistic narratives about power. Influence does not always announce itself.
Control does not always wear armor. The most decisive interventions in history often occurred far from battlefields, carried by individuals trained to observe, endure, and act without acknowledgement. The Middle East did not merely participate in the history of espionage, it authored it. Long before intelligence became a profession, it was a survival strategy refined through necessity. Women were not anomalies within this system, they were its foundation.
The legacy of these spies and seductresses is not found in monuments or chronicles, but in absences. Battles that never occurred, assassinations that failed, alliances that dissolved quietly before becoming wars. History often records only what happened, not what was prevented. The women who shaped events through secrecy operated in that invisible space, altering trajectories without leaving signatures. Modern historians struggle with this silence. Archives privilege declarations, laws, and military orders. Intelligence gathered through intimacy leaves little trace by design. When evidence appears, it is often distorted, filtered through accusations, moral judgments, or scandal. What survives is fragmentary, forcing reconstruction through context rather than confession. Yet patterns emerge consistently across centuries and cultures, pointing to a sustained tradition rather than isolated anomalies. These women were not driven by uniform motives. Some acted out of loyalty to family or homeland. Others sought protection, leverage, or escape. Many had no ideological commitment at all. Survival was the constant incentive. In environments where overt power excluded them, covert influence offered the only path to agency. This pragmatism unsettles narratives that demand clear virtue or villainy. Reality was messier, more human. The ethical ambiguity of their actions mirrors the ambiguity of power itself. Espionage relies on deception, but so does governance. Seduction manipulates emotion, but so does rhetoric. The distinction between immoral behavior and strategic necessity depends largely on perspective. Empires condemned these women publicly while benefiting from similar tactics privately. Hypocrisy became policy. Their greatest weapon was expectation. Men assumed control. They underestimated patience, dismissed observation, and equated dominance with security. These assumptions created openings. Spies did not need superior force. They needed time, access, and the ability to remain underestimated. Every conversation became an opportunity, every silence a shield. The cost of this life rarely appears in legend. Constant vigilance reshaped personalities. Many spies learned to suppress emotion entirely, becoming detached even from their own experiences. Others suffered profound isolation, unable to reveal truth without endangering themselves or others. There was no retirement from this role. Once trusted with secrets, one never fully returned to ordinary life. As the modern world romanticized espionage, it stripped away this reality. Fiction transformed spies into adventurers, reducing trauma to intrigue. The ancient practitioners would not recognize themselves in these portrayals. Their work was slow, methodical, and exhausting. It required endurance more than daring, silence more than action. Yet their influence remains embedded in modern intelligence practices. Psychological profiling, relationship-based infiltration, long-term positioning. These techniques were refined long before they were named. Modern agencies formalized what ancient women mastered intuitively. The difference lies in documentation, not effectiveness. The Middle East's role in this history is often overshadowed by later European narratives. This obscures the region's contribution to strategic thought. Long before espionage became institutionalized, it functioned as a cultural adaptation to instability. When borders shifted constantly, information became the most reliable defense. The phrase Mata Hari of antiquity simplifies a far broader phenomenon. There was no single figure, no origin point. There was continuity. Generations learned from observation, imitation, and necessity. Knowledge passed quietly, refined through experience rather than theory. This lineage survived conquest, religion, and empire because it addressed a constant human reality. Power fears what it cannot see. In acknowledging these women, history does not assign them sainthood or condemnation. It restores complexity. It recognizes that influence does not require permission, and that those denied authority often understand it best. Their stories remain incomplete, but their impact is undeniable. Empires fell, believing they were betrayed by fate, chance, or weakness. Few ever realized they had been outmaneuvered by those they never thought to notice. The true Mata Haris of antiquity were not remembered because they succeeded. They were forgotten because they did.